So hello everybody, another quick video keeping on our subject of testing. What we're going to talk about now are the kinds of tests that we have in existence and that we use. So the first kind of test I have to bring up is the proficiency test, because we're talking about language in this course. So what is proficiency? That's a really tough question, and that determines how proficiency tests might be made for specific contexts and situations. If you're testing proficiency for a UN translator, it's a lot different than if you're testing somebody who needs the skills to tell the driver, get me to the airport by 5 o'clock, or for a child who needs to go from grade 1 to grade 2. So proficiency is usually not tested in classes, and it's usually not based on courses that your students and your language learners have taken, but they do impact design of not just English language classes, but also K-12 classes, so it's something to think about. The next kind of test is achievement tests. So we have final achievement tests, final exams, which you know about really well, and we have to know that the achievement should be based perhaps on the syllabus or the books or the materials, or all a combination of all threes. So that is called the syllabus content approach. Some professors, like me with the QM standards, the testing is based on course objectives, and that's what SIOP follows too. So you should be very explicit about your objectives. And this helps you as a teacher to stay on task. It also helps the student in terms of the assessment to figure out if they've reached those objectives. So it's a little different than a final achievement that's a course syllabus design, because professors and teachers and instructors are not perfect, and their tests, testing and creating tests are probably the hardest things people do, and it's a huge business, as you know. Another test would be a progress achievement test, and these would of course measure progress, and what I find useful is short-term objectives. So a progress achievement test could be like pop quiz or a Kahoot, something like that. So they're kind of fun, and they make sure that you're ready to keep moving forward. Another form of test, we've looked at proficiency and achievement, is diagnostic. I'm sure you all know about diagnostic tests. Diagnostic tests are meant to identify your learner's strengths and weaknesses. They're often administered, at least in the United States K-12 system, by schools rather than by teachers themselves. And language schools where I've worked had their own in-house diagnostic tests. You can create different kinds of diagnostic tests to build profiles of your learners. Maybe a diagnostic test on vocabulary knowledge, which is why we talked about the Dolch list in the summer, grammatical accuracy, communicative competence in terms of appropriacy of speech and behavior in the classroom. All of those are profiles for diagnostic testing. And you can have multiple examples when you're testing diagnostically, because you need to make sure that you're testing contextually, not in isolation. Another test, I'm sure you know, because you're teachers, are placement tests. And the most successful ones are those that are made for specific contexts, environments, and situations. Okay, let's move on to another form of test, direct versus indirect testing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. So a direct test would be something that performs precisely that skill that we wish to measure. The best way to think of that is in terms of, take for example, a coach who wants to know if you can throw the football 50 yards. So that's measuring one skill of a football player, throwing that ball a certain length. Direct in terms of language and teaching would be maybe writing a composition using transitions that are appropriate, speaking using pronunciation that is intelligible. Direct is usually showing productive skills. It's harder to document receptive skills. How do you prove that somebody is listening and understanding when they're listening? So that they have to actually go from listening to maybe writing or speaking to get there. Direct tests are usually clear and straightforward, and they can be very helpful because they provide a way to give you positive backwash, like we need to work on that a little bit more. Indirect testings measure the abilities that underlie the skills that are direct, maybe identifying an error. If you have a sentence that has some grammatical errors, you ask the students to circle that error. That's an indirect way of testing for writing skills, because you're testing for error rather than making them productively right. It's kind of a relationship between true performance and indirect testing. The relationship is weak, so don't count on it 100%. Another form of testing that we should know about is discrete point versus integrative testing, and this is makes common sense. When you're discrete point testing, you're testing one element at a time. You're going item by item. And when you're doing integrative, you're combining many different elements in your testing. Maybe you're asking students to make notes while they're listening to something, or to take dictation, or to complete a close activity. So an integrative is very direct, and a discrete point is kind of an indirect form of testing. Then we go on to the norm reference versus criterion reference, and it'd be interesting to know what your schools use, or if they use both. Norm is in reference to all the other candidates, so where am I on the bell curve compared to the rest of the class? And the criterion is, what can this person actually do? I find that very helpful and useful as a language educator. So it constitutes classifying learners according to their tasks' abilities. We also have objective and subjective testing, which is hard to get away from in any kind of testing. If it's subjective, then it requires some judgment on your part as the assessor or evaluator, and objective theoretically means that it has no judgment. And then I should end by also mentioning computer testing, because so many of our refugee kids come to the United States. They've never seen a computer, and a lot of the testing is on computers. So how can that be a valid or reliable indicator if they don't know how to use the machine? Here are some final questions for you. Let me grab my pen again. Okay, here's my little pen. Oh, pen's not working. So I'll just ask you these questions then. Here we go. There we go. Number 1, what do your tests measure in your classrooms with your students, and how is it connected to English as a language that kids are learning? And 2, are your tests objective or subjective? Do you use direct testing or indirect testing? These are just some things for you to think about. Okay, that's it for now.